Hello and welcome to Relativity Legal Hold Training. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this training video and learn more about Relativity Legal Hold. My name is Jenny and I'm on the training team here at Relativity. Now to first give you some background on this video, it was once a live in-person training, but to make it more available to you, we've added it as on-demand content. To quickly level set who this video might be for, it covers introductory legal hold workflows and provides an overview and introduction to using the tool. So you can think of it like a 101 class, if you will. Now, although this is more of an introductory overview of legal hold, all experience levels are welcome, and I encourage you to still watch. I know that since you are watching, that you're a creative thinker, and maybe you will learn something new, or think of something new to ask for your own projects, or even see something that you haven't seen before. We will also briefly cover some of the admin setups that facilitate the use of legal hold features, and if you should need to dive into more advanced workflows, some references will be provided as well. Now, to level set with some logistics and expectations, note that this video is demo focused and runs a little under 2.5 hours. So of course, take the video at your own pace. And if you'd like to take your knowledge a step further after watching this training video, contact your account manager, solutions contact, or customer success manager to learn about more opportunities to get hands-on with the Relativity Legal Hold tool. All right, now that we've covered some logistics and a little bit of background on this video, let's discuss what will be covered. Now, the main objective of this video is to familiarize yourself with the legal hold application and gain the skills necessary to successfully administer a legal hold project from start to finish. So specifically, you'll learn how to create a project and assign different types of custodians. You'll learn how to customize and send hold communications, how to interact with the custodian portal, and how to use Relativity Legal Hold tools to help with reporting and compliance obligations. Okay, so these will be the main things that we will be covering throughout this course. And toward the end of the video, like I mentioned, we will cover some admin setups, kind of the behind the curtain look at the different types of setups that need to be done in order to facilitate the use of these tools. And I will also provide some different resources for you to take your knowledge and learning even further. Okay, great. So hopefully at this point you feel comfortable with the direction that this video is going, that you're comfortable with the course objective and how to make best use of this video. All right, so to start, let's discuss a brief overview of the Relativity Legal Hold application. But first, let's just kind of level set, in general, what is a legal hold and what triggers it? So here we see a definition. What is a legal hold? A legal hold is a process that an organization uses to preserve all forms of potentially relevant information when litigation is pending or reasonably anticipated. Now, what type of events could trigger a legal hold? If you even pause the video now and maybe stop and brainstorm and think, what kind of events could trigger this hold when, a litigation is pending or anticipated? Maybe there is something that you're working on now, or that you've, read about or have been involved with, or other ideas that you have. So if you want to kind of get the brain moving a little bit, feel free to pause and kind of brainstorm. Otherwise, let's just take a look at a couple of example events, just example scenarios. So, let's say an electric company receives a letter stating, hey, we're going to investigate your faulty wiring. That would be an event that could reasonably anticipate some sort of litigation. So that is where a legal hold could be triggered. Another example scenario is, let's say a pharmaceutical company is producing this generic drug that looks a lot like another pharmaceutical company's drug. So a patent infringement claim is brought against that company. So that's another example scenario that could trigger a legal hold. So overall, the anticipation of a lawsuit or the filing of a lawsuit is going to can trigger a legal hold. And when that occurs, it's very important to really preserve any, potentially relevant information. Now, in terms of the relativity legal hold application, it is an application that's built and operates within the Relativity platform. So it provides a defensible workflow that assists individuals responsible for managing the communication and the employee acknowledgement of legal hold notices. So the tool can really help you identify relevant data related to an active or anticipated legal matter and issue preservation holds on data. Now, there's also reporting features in Relativity legal hold that allow you to document and provide evidence that the organization is complying with its legal hold obligations. So, why do we have this tool, or why do we need this tool? Legal holds arise out of an organization's duty to preserve all information that may be relevant to a legal matter. Whether that matter is litigation or regulatory. Employees who are custodians of information related to the hold or stewards of information related to the hold also incur this obligation. These employees must be notified of their obligation, and they must follow the instructions that are provided in the hold. Failure to preserve relevant information can lead to discovery violations and sanctions for your organization. And this can not only be, of course, financially costly, but also may negatively impact the case, raising suspicion if information is lost or destroyed. Now, there are several different tasks around creating a legal hold project. We're going to cover these in more detail throughout the training, but let's just get an idea of what some of the different tasks are around creating a legal hold. So, drafting the legal hold notifications, identifying the players or the different custodians involved, those individuals that have potentially relevant information, delivering the hold, ensuring that employees are aware of and acknowledge their legal obligations, preservation of data, and we will discuss preservation holds within Relativity, gathering information via questionnaires, and really tracking, who responded and generate reports on their hold status. So these are a variety of responsibilities that a legal hold project consists of. And we will cover those throughout the training. Now, in the past, these types of tasks had to be done manually via emails, Word documents, spreadsheets for tracking, things like that. Of course, this can be a cumbersome process, and there's a lot of room for error when managing data manually and tracking via huge long-running spreadsheets. Okay, so this is where Relativity legal hold comes in, as it provides a standardized workflow that helps with all of this hold management. Okay, so manual tracking is a thing of the past when you use Relativity legal hold. Now, I'm going to demo for you each of these steps in greater detail, but let's take a look at the high-level Relativity legal hold workflow. So we can move step by step through several phases of a straightforward workflow process, and the first phase is setting up a project. So this begins with a triggering event. For example, I might know my company is going to be sued, or a branch of the government tells me they're going to investigate me. Maybe we're terminating an employee and we want to preserve all of his emails before they have the chance to delete them. In this case, we'd use a preservation hold to preserve that data. Whatever the triggering event is, as soon as we have a reasonable idea that there's going to be a lawsuit or investigation, we have a duty to start notifying people at our company to take steps to preserve any potential evidence. So at that point, a hold administrator would then create a hold and determine an initial list of people and assign roles such as custodian, HR, IT, etc. The next phase involves communicating with custodians. When thinking about legal hold communications, there are a few key factors that you should consider. What is our legal hold policy at the company? And once we've had this triggering event, how do we interact with people? How do we notify them that we've been served with a lawsuit and tell them to start preserving data? Relativity Legal Hold has tools to assist with creating the text of communications themselves, as well as with associated attachments and questionnaires that provide ways to inform custodians of their legal duties and learn more about their role and potential involvement in relevant activities. Those communications are sent directly from the legal hold application, which then provides the ability to send automated reminders or escalations where needed. A key note here is that this process isn't just limited to custodians. It also covers notifying outside groups like external counsel or IT. Now, moving right along these workflows, next comes the interviewing and tracking phase to manage the custodian's responses and acknowledgments. Once custodians have been notified of a hold, the legal hold application provides an easy way for them to acknowledge their hold responsibilities. The hold admin would then interact with them to learn more about how they create and store electronic information that might have something to do with the litigation. The hold admins then find out who the key players are, where the relevant data resides, and get a better understanding of their involvement in a particular project or division of the company. This isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all linear process. It involves asking questions, getting data back, making good decisions, and then asking more follow-up questions. Now, a big component of Relativity Legal Hold is the ability to send out questionnaires to gather that information, then review and take action based on the custodian's responses to those questionnaires. Now, all the while, the system provides high visibility to which custodians have responded and which tasks still need to be completed. The final phase is analyzing reports and closing the hold. So once the hold admin gets all this data back, how is it summarized to gain some visibility into what the numbers are saying in order to take the appropriate next steps? And once all these reasonable steps are taken, how are they documented? This happens through analysis and reporting. Relativity Legal Hold has a variety of sophisticated reporting capabilities, allowing you to understand a company's overall compliance with respect to the hold. These reporting tools also give your legal team something to put in front of a judge or opposing counsel that says, hey, here are the steps we took to follow a defensible process. It's key to remember that between creating and closing a hold, many or all of these steps may be repeated or recycled as you progress through the life of a hold. Some actions may be performed more than once. A legal hold is a dynamic process that lasts throughout the life of the matter. So, for example, new employees or newly transferred employees may become subject to the hold. The case may change and additional data sources may be added, or legal hold participants may be removed from the case. So keep that in mind that, this is a dynamic, iterative process. Now that we've taken a brief look at the legal hold workflow, let's talk briefly about different roles and their responsibilities in a hold. Who needs to be involved in the process? There are different people across different functions that might own and or administer a legal hold project. So for example, this could be paralegals, attorneys, information asset owners. And during this class, you will act primarily as a hold owner, but you'll also step into the shoes of a custodian to view the custodian portal. Roles provide us a way to distinguish between people on a legal hold and those assisting with legal hold compliance. So a project can have multiple people assigned to it in different roles. The Relativity legal hold application ships with the following roles by default. And, keep in mind, though, that new roles can always be added. For example, executive or parental leave, things like that. But these are just the common, quote unquote, out of the box ones that come when you install the legal hold application. So let's kind of go through high level each of these groups, each of these default roles. So the alert group, these groups may include HR, legal, and IT, or any group of individuals impacted by a custodian's response to a question. So they will be notified if a custodian answers a question in a certain manner, for example. Custodians are owners of potentially relevant data, and these groups will actually receive the legal hold notice. Human resources, you would want to use this role to simply identify HR groups involved in the hold. Information technology, these are groups who configure workspaces for legal hold. And keep in mind, sometimes this could also be the hold owner. Okay. Now, silent custodian indicates that the custodian will have a do not notify tag applied, which means that they won't receive communications from legal hold. They'll still appear in the custodians and custodian active projects reports, but these are just people that you don't want to make aware that they're on a legal hold or disturb with excess hold communications, such as the company CEO. Now, preservation hold, this role, when assigned to someone, would initiate a preservation hold on their Microsoft Exchange and OneDrive accounts. Of course, as long as this has been configured for use. And we'll see more on this later, more on preservation hold later. Okay, so let's just review some responsibilities of the hold owner and a couple of the roles that we just mentioned. Now, the hold owner manages the legal hold process, creating the hold, assigning communications and questionnaires, setting up reminders, reviewing reports, and releasing participants as required. Okay, so these are various responsibilities of the hold owner. So as you can see, everything from creating to assigning to managing and closing. Now, the IT administrator would set up the legal hold application in a Relativity workspace. Now, sometimes this is the same person as the hold owner, or it could be a completely separate admin depending on the organization. An administrator, specifically a Relativity system admin, would need to perform a one-time setup of the hold workspace. They also may be involved in the custodian creation and import process, and or setting up a preservation hold, which, like I mentioned, we'll learn more about later. An IT administrator can import custodians using the RDC, Relativity integration points, or regular LDAP imports. Note that some organizations will not let the person administering the hold or the hold owner add the application to the workspace, or will not know the settings to set up the email settings, for example. So in these instances, an admin will be set up for them. Other times there is no line separating the two and they are the same person. And keep in mind, later in the video, we will briefly discuss, a little bit of the hold admin configuration. So far we've briefly talked a little about custodians, but let's discuss more their responsibilities. Why are they important? Custodians are stewards of potentially relevant data. During the legal hold phase, a custodian is given a hold notice or communication providing details on the hold and any action items they may need to perform. So if necessary, they are required to preserve information and or data pertaining to the hold. The hold owner and or admin creates these custodians in the Relativity legal hold tool in order to assign them to a hold and send them hold notices and or any relevant communications. All right, so with that being said, recall that in this training, we are going to act as the hold owner. So the first thing that we'll need to do is create custodians. So let's take a look at how to do that in Relativity. Okay, so I'm logging in as a hold owner / hold admin. So we'll be acting as one and the same. Recall that, sometimes at organizations, this could be the same person or different individuals. But basically, this user that I'm logging in as has full permissions to all of the legal hold objects. Now I'm going to go ahead and navigate to this demo workspace. This is the workspace that I'll be completing all of the demos in for you. Now notice right away the views and the dashboards that are here. Now views and dashboards all work the same with Relativity legal hold. So note some of these pre-configured dashboards that show employee status by department, as well as department by manager. And below these bar charts, we can see the list of custodians and their status of involvement in a hold. So notice we're on the Entities tab. The entity object, formerly known as custodians, stores information about individuals involved in projects or holds as a custodian, a data steward, or alert group member. So when I go ahead and click on New Entity, you'll see several different cards here. And, we can track a variety of information in the entity object related to a legal hold custodian. So basic contact information, company information, location information, other location. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new contact. First name is Greg. Last name is Lestrade. I'll go ahead and enter in Greg's email. His company is Watson Labs. And his current title is Inspector. Now, just note here the location and other tabs. Under this other tab, there are options for custodian interaction. So if I click on this contextual help here, we can see that this describes these options. So we see full, none, and redirect. So the redirect option allows for communications to be sent to someone else to acknowledge on their behalf. If someone is, out of the office, for example. So we'll leave this for now for Greg, and we'll go ahead and click Save to save this new entity. Now there is another entity that we will need to redirect for. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to this entity, back on the Entities tab, and filter for CEO under Department. So here we have Molly Hooper. She's the CEO, and we will actually have to redirect any communication sent to her administrative assistant. So I'll go ahead and edit her entity. I'll navigate to the other tab, and I'll change the custodian interaction to redirect. Now, the redirect recipient, I'll go ahead and filter for administrative assistant and select Holmes Mycroft. And then click Save and Back. So in this particular instance, the administrative assistant will be receiving the communications on behalf of the CEO. So as you just saw here, our first step of creating custodians, it occurs on the entity object in Relativity. And keep in mind that custodians can also be created via the RDC, Relativity Desktop Client, or using Relativity integration points. So the import, or the creation rather, of custodians can also be done in those ways as well. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my demo for creating custodians. Just as a recap, remember that custodians are created on the entity object in Relativity. Okay, and custodians are all individuals involved in the projects or holds, and that can be in various different forms. So it could be a custodian, a data steward, or even just an alert group member. And just a little side fact, the entity object is actually shared between different Relativity applications. So shared between analytics, case dynamics, collect, processing, and of course, as you just saw, legal hold. And just remember that there are different ways to add entities to legal hold. So as you saw me do in the demo, you can manually create an entity from the Entities tab. You can also load and sync entities via Relativity integration points, or you can load entities via the Relativity desktop client. Okay, so you can do this via various methods at various different times for your projects. All right, so now it's time for a little quiz or a little touch point just to kind of level set what we have covered so far in this training video. So I'm going to show you these different options for this question here. The question being, what is not a component of a legal hold project? So at this point, I'll let you go ahead and maybe pause the video, just read through these options on your own, and kind of think on the answer if you'd like. All right, so hopefully you've come up with what you think the answer might be. I'll go ahead and reveal that answer now. So C is the correct answer. All of these components, managing communications and acknowledgments, determining who needs to be involved, and assigning roles, an iterative process, these are all components of legal hold except for C. Legal hold is definitely not a one and done process. Remember that legal hold, it's iterative. It's an iterative dynamic process that lasts throughout the life of the matter. So, for example, there may be new employees or, newly transferred employees, and they may become subject to the hold. The case might change and additional data sources might be added, or, legal hold participants may be removed from the case. So it's definitely a dynamic process that can change. So it's not necessarily just, one and done. All right. So moving right along here, now that we really have a background on the legal hold workflow and the roles, let's dive into the hold process creation itself. Now, the first step is to create a project. So here again are the steps involved in that process. Okay, so creating the hold, determining custodians, assigning roles. Now, before creating a project and issuing a hold, these tasks need to be done. So the data that should be collected for potential investigation needs to be identified. So You know, you'd need to find all data repositories that may hold pertinent information for the investigation. Then we need to identify the custodians of that data. You know, who owns the information? Now, once the custodians are identified, we would create them in Relativity and assign them a role that determines what type of communications they receive and when they can be released from a hold. We would also need to, understand the timeline of the complaint and gather any background information on the case. So these last two pieces are typically important for crafting the hold notice that will eventually go out to our custodians and inform them of their obligation to preserve their data, to provide them with that background and timeline. Okay, and now time for a demo. So remember that without Relativity legal hold, you'd have to just write up an email, perhaps attach the complaint, and then email it to a bunch of people. What Relativity legal hold allows you to do is organize the hold into a project, create and standardize communication, send that to custodians, and track their acknowledgement of the hold. So the first thing we'll need to do is we'll create the hold and assign custodians to the hold. So as I go to the Legal Hold Projects tab and create a new project, remember that we'll be using a project to keep all of the information related to the communication surrounding the legal hold in one place. So for this create from template field, legal hold does ship with a default template that we're selecting here, called legal hold template. Now this template can be revised to fit your needs, and additional templates can also be created to fit your various hold strategies. Now we will use the wizard. The wizard basically helps novice or infrequent users set up new projects. Now keep in mind that communications cannot be edited within the wizard only before or after creating the project. So, we're actually going to edit some communications after we after we create this project. Now, when we decide to use the wizard, the wizard will open with some pre-filled information based on the template we chose before. So we'll change this information to coordinate with our projects. So for step 1, project details, I'll go ahead and enter the project name. Now, the owner and owner email fields already contain the hold owner's information. This was set up in our template since Irene is the person in our organization that is typically in charge of setting up hold. So this is just sort of a made-up character here, just to demonstrate that if there was someone consistently in charge of setting up holds, you can set that up in the template, not have to re-enter it every time. Okay. Now, the type, we'll change that to legal hold. The type field is really for internal documentation. It does not really affect the project settings. Okay, and I'll set these other settings to no. And as far as the subject matter date, I'll go ahead and enter that date. And for the subject matter end date, for this project, there is no end date here as the litigation is ongoing, and custodians will be expected to preserve newly created information related to the hold. Okay, so there are various other settings and project details, such as general counsel, external counsel. We could also use this as a new template, but we're just going to leave these blank or at the default values, and I'll go ahead and click next. Now, step 2 of the wizard is communications. So you can use communications to send hold notices, questionnaires, follow-up communications, or anything else you need to send to any specified group regarding their involvement in the project or hold. The unselected template section on the left shows a list of any communication templates that have been created in the workspace. The selected template section on the right shows the generic communications that ship with the legal hold application. These communications are automatically created when we create a project, so they're already selected. Now, if we wanted to select another communication template or remove a selected one, we could select it and move it with the arrows here. But we'll go ahead and leave everything at the default communications. We're going to have a chance to customize these generic communications. So I'll go ahead and click Next. Step 3 of the wizard is the schedule step. So you can optionally schedule communications in this step by assigning dates, times, and communication recurrence levels in the project. So I'm going to go ahead and schedule this for tomorrow to be sent at 9 a.m. And I'll select the legal hold notice template and move it to selected communications. I'll then click Next. Now, step 4 is preserve in place. We're going to talk about how to set up a preservation hold in a different workflow later. So we're going to skip this step for now, but to give you some insight, the preservation hold allows us to preserve original files in a custodian's Microsoft 365 account, so OneDrive and Exchange, and or SharePoint before any edits or deletions are made. In some cases, you may want to send out a legal hold notice for the custodian to acknowledge and also set up a preservation hold. Now, in order to see this field, you need to grant permissions to a group to add preservation case. The permission is add preservation case within workspace permission. So keep that in mind. If someone's not seeing this option, they likely don't have that permission. Okay, but like I said, we're going to leave this for now as we will be diving into this later, and I'll click Next. Now, step 5 in our wizard is managing custodians. So, note that custodians are first assigned to a project, then they are assigned to a communication. So I'm going to filter for Greg Lestrade, the custodian we created earlier, and I'll move Greg to selected, and I'll assign him the role of custodian in the dropdown. Now, recall from the earlier slide that roles provide a way to distinguish between people on a legal hold and those assisting with the legal hold compliance. So for the most part, the role is simply a tag that indicates which group the custodian is a part of. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the steps for Molly Hooper. Remember, she is the CEO that will have her communications redirected to her administrative assistant. And then I will add a few additional custodians in the client services department here. Now, a project can have multiple people assigned to it in different roles. And once again, roles are really helpful to send communications only to specific groups. Now, step 6 is the summary. So on the summary page, you can review all of the actions taken while setting up the project. If you need to make any changes, you can navigate back by clicking the previous button or just clicking the step in the breadcrumb map at the top. This all looks good, so I'll click Complete Setup. Now, once the project is saved, the project details page displays. From here, you can view all the details of the project. Now, note the subtabs. We have various different subtabs such as communications, custodians. So this is where we'll include the communications and custodians in the project. We'll discuss these more in a bit. Now, the project console buttons on the right, these will allow you to take an action related to the project and its assigned custodian, such as changing roles, closing the project, running reports. The buttons are shaded gray when the action is unavailable, or they just may not appear at all, depending on your permissions. All right, so the next step in our workflow is going to be hold communications. So you can use communications or notices to send hold notices, questionnaires, follow-up communications, or anything else you need to send to a custodian or group of specified custodians regarding their involvement in the project or hold. So here is a recap of the steps and processes involved in creating a communication. So we see here, it's drafting notices, reminders, escalations, adding attachments, preparing questionnaires, and sending the notices. So we're going to take a look at these in more detail. Now, just a quick level set on, defining communication. Now, a communication is emailed through Relativity legal hold to custodians. Now, a communication is comprised of these components. So the notification email, the portal content. So, the custodian will access the communications via their portal. There will be reminder and escalation emails, and possibly a summary BCC email. So these are the different components of the communication. Now, we previously created a project with the legal hold template that ships with the legal hold application. Now, this template ships with example communications that can be customized. So I mentioned that when I was, creating the project, that we added those, I guess you could say, generic out of the box template communications. And, we are going to customize these in a bit. So first, we'll just discuss and elaborate a little bit on what they are. So the acknowledge email template, this includes an acknowledge email merge field inside the body of the text for a custodian to acknowledge a legal hold without any further investigation. The alert notice template notifies anyone in the alert group that a custodian might have potential involvement in a legal hold or matter. An alert notice can also notify the alert group that a custodian has answered a question in a way that requires attention. So maybe it's something for IT or human resources, for example. The legal hold notice template notifies custodians of an anticipated or actual legal hold and contains a link to the custodian portal where the custodian can acknowledge their participation in the hold or that they've received the notice. Now, this template contains the legal hold questionnaire template, which contains the typical questions that a company might want to collect from a custodian, such as whether they had prior knowledge of the hold or if they had access, or if they have access to electronic documents that may pertain to the hold. The legal hold release notice notifies on-hold custodians that they have been released from the hold or project. And just something I'd like to note here, everything that I just went through is very well documented in our documentation. So if you're looking for, more information or you want to read more about this, I can't stress enough the value of documentation. So help.relativity.com has these full definitions for you. Okay, so questionnaires are used to collect any information needed for the project. In a former manual process, something like this may have been done in an Excel spreadsheet. But now in Relativity Legal Hold, you can create questionnaires that can be reused across matters. So, you can create multiple different question types are available. So depending on the type of information you're gathering, here are the different question types that you can create. And you can also create conditional questions. Essentially, these will ask for additional information based on a custodian's response. So for example, if they answer yes to something, maybe the conditional question will pop up asking for more information. And we'll actually see that in a little bit in my demo. Now, the answers are stored in one location where you can run reports and to basically analyze the answers to your questionnaires. You can also mark a question as answer required to make sure you get the information you need. Now, keep in mind that you can only send a questionnaire by associating it to a communication. Now, attachments are files that actually appear as links in the custodian portal. So there's a much higher level of security than, just an attachment sent via normal email. These attachments may be highly confidential. There may be information you wouldn't really want to disseminate via email. So, things like the complaint, copy of corporate policy, responsibilities for custodians on the hold, or maybe a list of other custodians on the hold. So they are saved inside of the attachment library for future reference, and attachments, unlike communications, aren't sent out to custodians. Once again, they appear as links in the portal. All right, so let's take a look at creating a communication and a questionnaire. Okay, so here I am back at the legal hold project that I created earlier. And let's take a little further look at each of the subtabs of the project. So the first subtab here is the communications subtab. Now, this lists all communications associated with this project. Note that the communications are the generic ones added from the template, and the names did not change. We will customize one of these in a bit. The next subtab, the custodians subtab, lists all custodians assigned to the project. This tab has various fields for the custodian's information, like email, role, assigned date, etc. The mailbox subtab lists all of the sent and received emails from communications for this project. Note that emails have not been sent out for this project yet, which is why this tab is empty right now. The preservation hold subtab lists the custodians in Office 365 Exchange and OneDrive that are currently on a preservation hold. It also lists the custodian targets in SharePoint that are on hold. We will see more on this later. We're going to set up a preservation hold a little bit later. Now, the preservation target subtab is specific to SharePoint. It lists the status for each discovery of SharePoint targets that each custodian has access to. Now, the final subtab here, tasks. Here you can create different types of tasks for specific projects to manage custodians, IT requests, and other user tasks associated with the project. You can assign to a user in Relativity and then communicate with them outside of Relativity about the task assignment and details. Now, looking over to the right to the project console, recall that the project console allows you to take an action related to the project and its assigned custodians. And buttons are shaded gray when the action is unavailable. So note that now in our project here, change role, release, remove buttons, these are all now available. So now I'm actually going to use one of these console buttons to change a role. Custodian roles can be changed at any time throughout the process. So as we saw earlier, Legal Hold ships with a handful of roles by default, but you can also create your own roles from the Hold Admin tab. So first, I'll click Change Role and select one of our custodians. Now here in the Assign Role dropdown, above the selected box on the right, I'm going to select Silent Custodian. Now, this role, you would change to this role so that the particular custodian won't receive communications from legal hold, but will still appear on reports. Remember, these custodians are people you don't want to make aware they're on a legal hold, nor disturb with excess hold communication, such as the company CEO. Okay, so now that I've selected this role, I'm going to move the custodian over to the box on the right with the arrow. Then I'll click the Change Role button on the bottom right. So now if we take a look at the custodian subtab, we can see the role change. If we don't see it right away, we could just refresh the page and it will show up here. Okay, so I've mentioned a few times that we are going to customize the generic example communications that came over with the legal hold template. So we're going to go ahead and do that now to get it ready to send out to our custodians and data stewards. So navigating back to the communications subtab, I'll click Edit next to the existing communication named Legal Hold Notice Template. Now, each communication needs a name, so I'll go ahead and name this Moriarty versus Watson Labs Hold Notice. And in the email subtab, this is where we're really going to customize our text, customize the subject. So let's start from the top here. So send as, I'm going to go ahead and enter my email address. Now, this field is essentially the email address you want the communication to be sent from. So this feature allows you to send a communication on someone else's behalf. So for example, a junior attorney may send the email, but may want the email to appear as coming from the general counsel. Now, before I start making any edits, notice the highlighted text brackets. These serve as visual indicators for items that should be customized. Now, the entire email body can be modified, but the highlights point out the commonly modified area. So of course you could, customize the entire thing, but the highlights serve as a guide for areas that are typically customized. So for example, we see here the background and potential claims should be updated to reflect the specifics of each case. So I'm going to go ahead and customize this. So in the subject, I'll remove project name in brackets and enter our specific name for the project. Okay, in the body, I'll go ahead and change all the text so it only displays likely litigation by deleting out the government investigation, since this particular hold is involving a likely litigation. Okay, now I'll remove the brackets and change the highlight color to white. Okay, and now I'm going to delete all these other references except for company in this first sentence of the communication. Okay, and once again, I'll remove the brackets and change the highlight color to white. Okay, now recall we talked about earlier in the video that it's important to provide, the background for the hold. So here in the communication is where we can enter that background. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the background that I have here into the background text. Okay, and in our made-up scenario that we have for this hold, the background is, Moriarty Drug is claiming that Watson Labs violated their patented technology in the development of the pharmaceutical product Conan Doilex. Okay, now we see that the text is a little bit different, so I'm going to go ahead and change the text formatting to match. So it'll be all Arial, size 14, color black. Okay, so in the greeting, you'll notice that there are brackets here, and it says custodian dot first name. So this is an example of merge fields. So you can use email merge fields in the editor window to embed project information in a communication subject line and body text, which will then translate into the corresponding legal hold field value upon sending. So right now, I put my cursor right to the right of custodian.firstname. So I'm going to go ahead and select the different options from the drop down, and this will insert the field I select at my cursor in the text editor. Okay. So right now I'm merging in custodian last name. So when this notice gets sent out, this field will get replaced with the custodian's last name. And keep in mind, in the subject line, a moment ago, I manually updated the project name, but technically that was also a merge field. There was the text within the square brackets, project name, so that would have just pulled from the project name field as well. So no need to type that in manually. That's a merge field as well. Also note the portal link merge field. This will insert a link to the custodian portal that we'll look at later. Okay, so now that we've customized the communication for our holds, let's move right along to the portal content subtab. And you'll notice at the top, the fields are already populated as acknowledgement required and is legal hold. Now you'll see this attachments field, and attachments can be added to the custodian portal content the way you would attach anything to a typical email. Also, any document can be attached and saved in the attachments library. Now, as far as questionnaires go, you can create new questionnaires from scratch, but for the sake of today's demonstration, we'll just modify the existing one. So I'm going to open this questionnaire template by clicking the link Legal Hold Questionnaire Template. Now I'll edit the name to be Moriarty versus Watson Hold Notice. Okay, so you'll notice a couple of common questions in this questionnaire. Did you ever have any involvement with or knowledge of the subject matter of the hold that could help either party? Do you have access to or know the location of any emails, documents, or other records? And then you'll notice the condition on this question. If the answer is yes, briefly describe. So these are very common questions, but remember, we're customizing everything right now. Everything is completely customizable depending on the needs of the case. So the first thing that I'll do is I'm going to edit the first existing question, and we're going to save this question to the library. This is a question that we might want to use for other holds. Okay, so I'll select yes under Save to Question Library with the question category of General Information. I'm going to go ahead and create a new question. And keep in mind that when you add a new question, you can also save the question to the library and make it required. So I'll go ahead and type in a new question here. And that question being, are there other people who may have information related to this matter? Now, the question type here is yes, no. And then for answer required, we want to make sure that this is set to yes. We're also going to save this to the library for repeated use. And the question category will just be general information. And then I'll click save. Now, recall when we were discussing hold communications that in your questionnaires, you can add a condition to a question which serves as a follow-up. Again, this can be a follow-up communication to the responder, sending a notice to an alert group, or just adding another follow-up question. So we're going to go ahead and add a follow-up question to the question we just added. So to do so, this icon here, this plus sign, is the add condition icon. So I'll go ahead and add a condition, selecting yes in the new condition pop-up, and then selecting yes next to display question. Now here you see this import question. This allows us to import a question from the library to serve as a follow-up in case someone answers yes to this question. And the library stores items for repeated use. So the question that I want as the follow-up is, do users store files on file servers or locally? So I'll go ahead and import that and click Save. Okay, so as you just saw, you can not only edit the existing questions in the template questionnaires, rename the questionnaire to fit the needs of your project. You can also add new questions and add conditions. And in terms of rearranging the order of the questions, is as simple as a drag and drop. So if you'll notice, I'm just going to drag and drop this to rearrange the questions. Okay, so now I'll go ahead and click Save. Now, the Reminder and Escalation subtab, here we can see that a reminder will be sent out to custodians who have not yet acknowledged their hold. We can also escalate if desired. Now, typically, escalations are sent to a custodian's manager. Legal hold sends the escalation email one iteration after the scheduled reminder ends. So I'll go ahead and set this up for automatic reminders. The allotted number of reminders will be 4, and the reminder interval will be 7 days. And we'll also set this to yes for automatic escalations. Now, if you'll notice this CC recipients, this is where you can escalate the reminder to additional people. So let's say in this case, a legal hold administrator. Now this last subtab in the Communications tab is Summary BCC. This tab allows you to send a customized email to any custodian or group in legal hold. The email includes the text you specify, a line break, the original communication that's sent to other people through non-BCC, and an attachment listing all the people the original communication was sent to. Now, note that the legal hold BCC feature isn't a quote-unquote true BCC to all original emails, but rather a unique email that consolidates the details from many emails into a single email. All right, so with any communication, it's always a good idea to preview it before sending it out. And over on the console on the right, the communication console, there is a preview section. So there's different options for preview. Now, this send preview button will allow you to send yourself or someone else a preview of the communication so you can see what a custodian would see and make any corrections before sending an official one out. Now, using the preview portal feature, I'll go ahead and click that. You can see the hold notice and continue to the questionnaire. So if I click to questionnaire, you can actually answer the questions but not submit them. So I can go ahead and answer a couple of these questions, and notice that this question here, are there other people who may have information related to this matter? If I answer yes, notice how that follow-up question pops up. We set that up earlier as the additional condition to this question. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close out of preview. Okay, so now that we've previewed our communication, we can go ahead and send out our communications. Now, we did set up our communications to be scheduled when we went through the project setup wizard. However, you can also control how and when you send communications from this send communication area in the communication console here. Now, the Select from All button allows you to select specific custodians, including ones that have already had a communication sent to them. So I'll go ahead and click Select from All, and I'm going to select Hooper and Lestrade. Now, although we did schedule our communications to be sent out tomorrow morning, for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to go ahead and select them and send it out now. Okay. Now, Select from Unsend only shows custodians that haven't had a communication sent to them yet. Now, the Remind, Escalate options, you can use these to prompt a custodian to acknowledge a participation in a hold or respond to a questionnaire if they're unresponsive. So, when I click Remind now, note that Hooper and Lestrade display as we just sent them the hold and they haven't acknowledged yet. So I'll go ahead and click Cancel. And the final button on the console here is Acknowledge on Behalf. So remember that a custodian, may be unable to acknowledge or officially accept their participation in a hold. For example, the custodian may not have an email address or they are no longer with the company. So in many cases, the hold owner can acknowledge a custodian's participation on behalf of the custodian if necessary. Okay, so we've seen all of the steps involved in creating a communication. This is just one type of communication that you can create in Legal Hold. So I'm going to navigate back to the project by just clicking the project link here to get to our project homepage. And note that there is a Create Communication button here. Now, this will show you how to start the process from scratch and the different types of communications available. So, for example, you can create a follow-up notice based on an available template or create it from scratch. So once a hold communication has been sent, it's locked and can no longer be edited. So we might use a follow-up notice to collect more information from certain custodians who answered yes to specific questions in our first communication, for example. Using a follow-up notice would allow you to attach another questionnaire that contains more specific or different questions. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and cancel out of there. That was just to really demonstrate that you can create a communication from scratch. Now, when we select the Mailbox subtab, notice the message status as sent to the two custodians that we just sent the communication to. Okay, so that brings us to our next quiz. Just a little touch point on what we just discussed. Now I'll go ahead and read the question. When setting up a legal hold communication, what optional functionality can you set up to better ensure custodian acknowledgement? Okay, so feel free to pause the video and think on the answer if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and reveal the answers. So technically, flagging is the only option that's incorrect. So recall that you can use the Remind or Escalate buttons to basically prompt a custodian to acknowledge their participation if they're unresponsive. And typically, escalations are going to be sent to a custodian's manager. That escalation email is sent, recall, one iteration after the schedule reminder ends. And with reminders and escalations, you can update these anytime before or after you send a communication. Communications will always remind or escalate according to the date that the communication was initially sent. Okay, and recall that the BCC feature is a unique email that consolidates all the details of many emails into a single email. Okay. All right, so let's move on to preservation holds. A preservation hold, or Relativity's preserve in place feature, allows administrators to preserve a custodian's Microsoft Office 365 data. So this includes, Exchange mailboxes, OneDrive files, Skype for business conversations, and SharePoint sources. Now, keep in mind that we'll see that the preservation source options will be Mailbox, OneDrive, and SharePoint. But Microsoft stores users' Skype messages inside their Outlook mailbox. So when a mailbox is preserved, those Skype messages are part of that preservation. Now, this feature mitigates the risk of data loss, prevents the need to overcollect data, and provides a defensible way to preserve data during a litigation hold. So this really ensures that original copies of emails, files, documents are preserved in an Office 365 preservation library prior to any edits or deletions. The preservation library ensures that, even if it's accidental, an accidental deletion, there's no data loss. So it ensures there's no loss of data through either an accidental or willful deletion of items under preservation hold. Now, we'll see that date filters allow you to only preserve data from a specific time frame, and the data will be preserved until the hold is removed, and custodians won't be notified about the preservation. It's important to note that, although this is an introductory course to legal hold, it's important to note some of these admin settings. This is a one-time setup that needs to be done before creating a preservation hold. And this is in the legal hold admin tab. It's simply a tab titled preservation hold settings in order to create the data sources for a preservation hold. An Office 365 E3 license or higher is required to use these features. And it's very secure. So the credentials used for accessing Office 365 are stored in an encrypted state. Okay, so this screenshot here is essentially the preservation hold settings in Relativity. So these would be the different settings that would be entered, such as the domain name of the Microsoft 365 tenant, as well as the account user and password. And it's very well documented on getting this set up, but just please note that this is needed before being able to create data sources for a preservation hold. Okay, so once that setup is done, we actually have a connection to the Office 365 tenant. To actually create a preservation hold, you can add a preservation case. You see the screenshot on the left here, says preservation case add. You can do that when creating a project. So earlier when we were creating a project, there was a preserve in place section that we skipped over because we're going to do it later. So you can do it later as well. You can edit an existing project to add the preservation case. Okay. Now, once added, you would fill out the fields on the preservation case settings pop-up. So this preservation source here allows you to select which sources will get held. Now, a common question that comes up regarding preservation holds is, whose data gets held and data from which time frame. So any custodian added to the project with the preservation hold role will get held. So on the left here, we see a screenshot of two custodians. You can see that their role is preservation hold, and their data sources will be preserved according to the date range provided in the preservation case setup. So on the right, we see that same screenshot from the previous slide where we add the preservation source, and then there's that start and end date. So their data sources will be preserved according to the date range provided there. Now, if no dates are entered, it will preserve all data, which is not really recommended. Typically, dates are chosen to correspond with the matter so that only data starting with the start date and ending with the end date will be preserved. Okay, next I'll walk you through a demo of setting up a preservation case to our existing hold by placing 3 new custodians on a preservation hold. Okay, so here we are back in our legal hold project, and recall from the previous slides that we just covered that to add a preservation case, you can do so when initially creating a project, or you can edit and add the preservation case on an existing project. So in our project, we're going to go ahead and edit the project. And then here, next to the preservation case field, we're going to go ahead and add our preservation case. Now, when we add a preservation case, this pop-up displays the parameters to specify. So first, I'll go ahead and give our preservation case a name. Now, before I add the preservation sources, remember that a one-time setup needs to be done first to create the data sources for a preservation hold. So these settings specify the domain of the Microsoft 365 tenant, the URL connection to the Microsoft 365 protection services utilized by Relativity Legal Hold, and the account user and password used to access Microsoft 365. This has all already been done in this workspace. And keep in mind, like I said, this is well documented in terms of setting this up. If you or anyone on your team is the one to set this up, it's under legal hold admin in the preservation hold settings. Okay, so with that being said, that's already been set up for us. So I'm going to go ahead and select the source. And I'll select Mailbox, OneDrive, and SharePoint. Now for the retry count, this is the number of times legal hold will retry to correct a failed preservation hold process. So we'll set this to 5. The retry interval is the number of minutes between each retry. So we'll set this to 5 as well. For the monitoring interval, this is the number of hours between each time legal hold monitors Office 365 for deletions or edits to filter criteria made within Office 365 Security and Compliance Center. Okay, now monitoring only covers preservations initiated from the legal hold application. Preservations that were created directly in the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center are not monitored. So we'll leave it at the default of 24. And although the default is 24 hours, this should be adjusted based on the amount of active preservation cases that you have. So for example, if an organization is a heavy user preservation functionality, they should consider a longer interval like 48 hours or even weekly monitoring runs. That would be something like 168 hours. Okay, so for the start date, recall that it's recommended to choose dates that correspond with the matter. I'm just going to enter today's date for the purposes of the demonstration, and I'll go ahead and click Save. Now that we've added the preservation case to our project, we next need to assign custodians to the preservation case. So for demo purposes, we already have a few custodians set up with linked Office 365 accounts. So here in the project console, under Manage Custodians, I'm going to go ahead and click Assign. Now these particular made up custodians, if you will, work for Microsoft, and I'll go ahead and filter in the company column for Microsoft. Then I'll select the checkbox next to all 3 custodians. And before I move these custodians over to the box on the right, first I need to assign them the role. Recall that earlier when we changed a role for someone, we changed the role to silent custodian. We first changed the role in the drop down and then we moved them over. Okay, so first in the assign role drop down, I'm going to go ahead and select preservation hold and then move the custodians over to the box on the right with the arrow. Okay, now I'll click assign on the bottom right. And if we check the preservation hold subtab, note that even though we added 3 custodians, there are 6 entries in this subtab. That is because each custodian has 2 entries, one for their mailbox hold and one for their OneDrive hold. Although we did select SharePoint in the source earlier, these particular custodians don't have SharePoint configured, so we only see mailbox and OneDrive for each. Note that there is a status for each custodian displayed for the mailbox and OneDrive. These are currently at pending. Now, once they are on hold, it will display on hold. Keep in mind, if preservations are taking a long time to display on hold, it is likely the preservation agents, which are essentially back-end processes that run the preservations. These agents are likely tied up with monitoring jobs. Another thing to keep in mind is that the shorter the monitoring interval is, the more jobs that are created over a given period of time. And a longer monitoring interval reduces the amount of monitoring jobs being created over time, thus reducing the burden on the preservation agents. So something to just keep in mind, in these training environments, we may not see the status flip as quickly. In your actual projects, just note that if there could be a couple of reasons why custodians aren't showing up as on hold. It could be what I just mentioned about the monitoring intervals. It could also be that the configurations for their tenant status in Office 365 would need to be double checked. And then you would also have to double check your preservation hold admin settings to make sure those are configured properly as well. Now, something to note, a custodian can be active in multiple projects and can be on multiple preservation holds. So if one preservation hold in one project is removed, another could still be in place. When a preservation hold is removed in Relativity, only that one preservation hold is removed in the Security and Compliance Center. So to recap what we have done so far, we have discussed and demonstrated creating custodians, creating projects, and assigning custodians in a project and creating communications. The next step is to discuss custodian actions. Now, after sending out the communication, the next step is, quote unquote, working with custodians. Here again are the steps involved in that process. So, as you see here, during the manage responses and acknowledgements phase of the project, this is when you'll receive the acknowledgements, follow up on questionnaire responses, and monitor and review completed tasks. And during this phase, you may get the following from custodians, questions as to why they are being included. You may have to clarify what the hold is asking a custodian to hold, and you may learn that there are other people you should have sent the hold to. Now, custodians will interact via the custodian portal. So in the portal, they can acknowledge their participation in a hold. They'll answer questionnaires. They can view all of the active projects they're associated with. And in the portal, they can easily address any other outstanding tasks. And we will see the portal in just a bit. Now, accessing the custodian portal, custodians can only access the custodian portal via a secure link in a legal hold communication. So Here in this screenshot, we see an example communication sent out with the portal link. So if you recall from earlier, we customized this communication. They would access the portal right here in this link. Now, once they click on the link, now we see what the portal looks like. There are no login credentials required. Once you click the link, you are taken directly to the portal. Essentially, the link is the password to the portal. Users don't need any relativity knowledge in order to use it, and the number of custodians in the portal does not affect your relativity user seat count either. And the custodian portal is compatible with all major browsers. So like I said a moment ago, we will take a look at the custodian portal. So next, I'm actually going to walk you through a demo and we'll take a look. All right, so here we are back in Relativity. And in this demo, I'm going to show you what the experience would be from the custodian perspective. So in this second tab here, I have Mail Enable open. So Mail Enable is simply just an email client that we set up for the purposes of these demos to show you what the custodian experience is like. So this could be, the experience from any email client rather. So, Outlook, Gmail, wherever the emails are going. So this is just kind of our, the one that we set up here. So we are going to be logging into this mailbox as Greg Lestrade. That was our first demo custodian. Now I'm just going to go ahead and log in as Greg. Looks like there's an autofill here from last time I had logged in. Okay, so here we're looking at Greg's emails, and I'm going to go ahead and click on Inbox. So here we see the two messages for Greg's legal hold notice for the Moriarty versus Watson Labs matter. Now recall that when we set up the communications, we first set them up to be scheduled for a specific time, and then in another demonstration, we manually sent the communication. So that's why there's two of those in the inbox. One for the scheduled one that was sent out and one that I sent manually just for the purposes of demonstration. Okay, so that's what these are, but these are both simply the legal hold notice. So I'll go ahead and click on one of them here. Okay, so just taking in this communication, let's take a look at some of the fields we configured. So if we look here, the from field, remember that I entered my email address here. Recall that can be configured to display whatever email address is needed. Now here for the greeting, we have Dear Greg Lestrade. Remember that this was all from merge fields. Recall that we basically merged last name next to the first name via the merge fields operation. So that went ahead and inserted the last name for the custodian here. So for Greg Lestrade. And this is everything that we customized essentially. So recall that we removed the government investigation. We only had litigation here. We removed, person, all the other terms that were here, and we just entered, just left company. We entered the background here. It looks like the text is a little bit smaller. I may have somehow fat-fingered that when I was adjusting that, but that's easily configurable. Recall back in Relativity, you can adjust, the font size and everything like that. And notice here that this is the actual portal link. It says, please click here to review your please click here to review your responsibilities and respond to the related materials. So recall that in Relativity, that was a merge field for the portal link. So now we see the link. Okay, so from this link, if I click on this link here, this allows the custodian to continue to the notice and questionnaire. But first, I'm going to actually close this, but I'm going to show you another way that we as admins can access the portal. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to Relativity on this first tab here. And here on the Entities tab, I'll filter for Mr. Greg Lestrade. And when I click on his entity, notice under this custodian console here, there are two buttons: Use Portal As and Send Portal Link. Okay, so the Send Portal Link will simply send the custodian an email containing the link to the portal. Let's say, they noted, they don't see it or they need the link again. We can easily just send the link directly from their entity via this button here. Now, you can also mimic logging into the portal as the custodian by clicking Use Portal As. Okay, so I'm going to actually click on that. Now, note the orange bar here at the top stating we are acting on behalf of Greg Lestrade because we are using the portal as him. This portal, it's going to show the active holds and any tasks requiring attention, in addition to completed tasks. You can choose to acknowledge and comply to the hold notice, and you must acknowledge before responding to the questionnaire. So under tasks requiring attention, I'm going to go ahead and click on Moriarty versus Watson Labs hold notice. And if I scroll to the bottom, you see this I acknowledge button here. So if I click on that, this will pop up. It's a free text box to specify a reason. So I'll go ahead and type in, I comply with these hold requirements. Oh, little typo there. Go ahead and retype that. Okay, and then click acknowledge. Okay, so now we can continue to the questionnaire. Remember that questionnaires are a part of the communications. Okay, so I'll go ahead and answer some of these questions. Notice you can fill this questionnaire out from the custodian perspective. Okay, so I'm actually going to click Save and Submit so that we can, take a look at these answers in our reporting demo a little bit later. But keep in mind, we can also save the questionnaire as a draft if necessary to return to later. But I'll go ahead and click Save and Submit. All right, and then notice how the tasks requiring attention updates immediately because we have acknowledged the hold and we have also completed the questionnaire. And this will show up in the completed tasks tab here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and return to the Mail Enable tab here. And, if you remember from the beginning of the video, we set up a redirect when we were talking about Molly Hooper as the CEO and Mycroft Holmes as her assistant. We had assigned Molly Hooper to the hold, but did not assign Mycroft. However, due to the custodian interaction setting on Molly Hooper set as redirect, Mycroft will receive a detailed hold communication. So let's go ahead and take a look. So I'll actually log out of Mail Enable from Greg's user here. And then I'm going to log back in as Mycroft. Okay, I can autofill from when I had used this previously. Okay, and then clicking into the inbox here. So you can see here that Mycroft, the designated redirect custodian, received the Watson hold communication even though he was not assigned to the hold. There are security considerations to this interaction that you will want to discuss with your organization as to how much access to Relativity you may want to give a redirect custodian. And we'll be talking about legal hold permissions a little bit later in the video. So we're going to talk about migrating legacy hold information. So far we've discussed and demonstrated projects, communications, and custodian actions. So we're going to cover now what you would need to do if you're moving to Relativity Legal Hold from a legacy hold tool. When migrating from a legacy hold tool to Relativity Legal Hold, first you have to export all data related to your holds from the tool so it can be imported to Relativity. It's really important to understand how to format your exported data so it can be successfully imported into Relativity. Now, depending on which tool you use, you may export your data to one large file or to many separate files. Before you can import the data into Relativity, you have to prepare the data in a specific format so it can be ingested into Relativity Legal Hold. Now, the last step, of course, is ingesting the data into Relativity, and this can be done via the RDC or the Relativity desktop client. A couple of considerations here for migration. If you don't have the expertise in-house, we recommend reaching out to your Relativity account manager to find a partner that can help you. After importing your legacy information, you'll have to resave your legacy communications in Relativity to reinstate any scheduled reminders or any escalations as well. The next step in our legal hold process here, now that we've covered projects, communications, custodian actions, migrating from legacy tools, is working with reports. So this brings us back to our 4-step workflow here to report and maintain or close. And there are a variety of reports to help analyze every legal hold action. Recall that in a manual process, you have to create your own reports, either in Excel or Word. But in Relativity Legal Hold, there's a variety of reporting options to help you analyze any legal hold actions, such as hold notice, response, confirmation, escalation, release, tracking non-acknowledgements, and you can generate these reports on the fly or schedule them to run on a recurring basis. Additionally, using Relativity's UI, you can make custom pivot widgets and dashboards to view your data in your hold quickly and easily. Now, here we see a screenshot of a couple of different dashboards, and when you are making these pivots and configuring them into a dashboard, all legal hold fields are already pivot enabled for easy visualization. And the default dashboards can be customized, new dashboards can be created, and these dashboards can be exported and used as reports. Now, all questionnaire responses, recall in the demo just a moment ago, I had mentioned that I was going to, answer some questions on behalf of the custodian so that we could see those answers in reporting later. This is in the question responses sub-tab. So any questionnaire responses, or rather all questionnaire responses, will appear in this question responses sub-tab. You can use the column filters to sort information and click on an item to view its details. And once again, you can add widgets and dashboards to visually display answer statuses by project, custodians by project, etc. Okay, so there's a lot of different options there for you. Now, there are also built-in reports. There's a handful of built-in reports that can be generated per project. Multiple projects are scheduled to send out at a later time. Now, in this screenshot here, we see that on the left, there's several different report options. The contextual help, the little circle with the question mark, that if you click that, that does provide detailed descriptions for each report type. So I will go through a couple of those types with you in a demonstration to take a look at some reports and some different dashboards. Okay, so here we are back in Relativity. To run reports, you can run legal hold reports to analyze and manage your projects from the reports tab. So I'll go ahead and navigate to the legal hold reports tab here. And recall this image, I guess, from the previous slides that we had gone over. And recall that to run a report, there's different reports that you can select on the left, and you can read a brief description of each report using contextual help here. So I'll go ahead and click this. Now, before I actually run our first report, I'll quickly just point out a few reports that would be helpful for various types of needs. So, to see who isn't responding, a couple of reports that would be really helpful for that are the non-responsive custodians report. So we see by the description here, this report shows us who has not acknowledged the hold notice or completed any questionnaires. And the open tasks report is also another report that is helpful to see, who isn't responding. So similarly, it shows who hasn't responded or acknowledged yet across every project. Now, some helpful custodian information. There's a couple of reports for that. So the custodian's report shows a list of all people on a project, their role, status, received communications, and average response times broken down by project. Another report that we're actually going to run in a bit is the custodian change report, and this also offers, helpful custodian information, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. Now, the first type of report that we're going to run is the communication summary report. So just to read through the description, you can run this report to track down the status of projects broken down by individual communication. Each communication and questionnaire displays with an indication of the response status for each individual the communication was sent to. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close this out, but just keep that in mind. You can also find information about these reports and documentation, but this contextual help is really handy to read about it right there. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click on the communication summary. So to run the report, you first select the report that you want to run. And then as you noticed in the center here, the different projects in this workspace display. I'm actually going to run this in a different project, and I'll go ahead and select the checkbox to the left of the project, and notice how these buttons now display. So I can schedule the report for a later date, or I can just generate the report ad hoc. So I'll go ahead and generate that now. So in the communication summary report, take note of the number of custodians and the acknowledgement percentage. So here we see the acknowledgement percentage and the number of custodians here. Now, also note, if I scroll down a bit here, the acknowledgement versus questionnaire completion percentage. Many people acknowledged, but only a quarter actually turned in the questionnaire. Because if we look here at the acknowledgement percentage, it's 74%, and the questionnaire percentage is 23%. This may prove insightful in reevaluating the questionnaire or sending out a reminder or escalation to serve as a reminder to complete that questionnaire. And this report here that we just generated, this can be exported. So up here, if I click this, these are the different export options. So we see PDF, XLS, text, image, CSV. So there's some different options to export out the report. So this button to the left of those options, if you notice a little pop-up, it says export a report and show it in a new window. So that's how you can export that out. All right, I'll close out the communication summary report and let's move on to our next report. Okay, so the next report that we'll run is the global summary. So I'll open up contextual help once again so we can take a look at the description of the global summary. So you can run this report to detail the most active people in your projects. The graph shows the top 10 people by number of projects, while the table displays all people on at least one project. You can see the subject matter time span for each person and the last time there was any activity between the application and the person. Okay, so I'll close out of contextual help here and I'll select global summary. Okay, so this time instead of just generating the report ad hoc, I'm going to schedule this report. So I'll click schedule report. Okay, and first I'll give this report a name. So this is just simply my global summary scheduler demo. The report type is global summary. Now email addresses, I'll just go ahead and enter mine for the demonstration. Now, as far as which projects to run this against, you can run it against all active projects or specific projects, and you'll notice that the one that we already selected displays here. Okay, so overall, you would use this scheduling feature to run reports on a set recurring basis. Typically, you'd use this to schedule a report to send out for the duration of a project or hold. Even though you can schedule a one-time report, this feature is optimized for longer-term use. Okay, so I'll go ahead and enable the schedule here by clicking yes, and then clicking the ellipses next to schedule to schedule and set up the frequency. So the frequency here, I'll just set it up as daily. The start date will be tomorrow's date. The end date, no end date. We're just going to do this for the duration of the project per se. And scheduled time, you can choose a time here and then click schedule. Okay, so again, the scheduled reports can report on one or multiple projects in your workspace, and legal hold will then send the scheduled report in an email PDF attachment to anyone with a valid email address, including non-legal hold custodians. Okay, so in this particular example, it would send to my email address. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click Save and Back to get to the original reports page now. Now for this pop-up, this is in line with what I had just mentioned in regards to the report sending to anyone with a valid email address, including non-legal hold custodians. So basically it's just saying the recipients will see the same content as you regardless of their permissions. Okay, so that's just an additional reminder that they'll see the full details of the report. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click Save. All right, so we just generated a communication summary report. We scheduled a global summary report. Next, we'll take a look at the custodian change report. Once again, I'm just going to use contextual help. And if we take a look at the custodian change report description, we see that you would run this report to track changes to custodians' details, such as title or employment status for all custodians on an active project, to get updates that could potentially affect your preservation strategies. Okay. And this also reminds us that to run this report, you need the View All Audits permission set. Okay, so that's a great reminder there. So I'll go ahead and close this. Okay, and I'll select Custodian Change. Okay, and notice that no projects appear here. You don't need to select a project. Instead, you would just schedule it. There's only an option to schedule it, as you can see here. So I'll click that. Okay, and for my report name, it will be Custodian Change Demo. The report type, of course, is Custodian Change. Once again, we enter our recipients here in the email addresses field. All right. And note how it states the custodian change report will always run against all active projects. Okay. Now we'll enable the scheduler and then input the frequency. So the frequency for this one we'll set as weekly, every week, on Friday, starting at a specific date to align more with the projects that we have in this case. Okay, and the end date will be today's date. And this is so we can really see any custodian changes from inception to now for some of these projects. And the scheduled time, once again, we'll just set it at 9 a.m. Okay, then I'll click schedule and save and back to get to the original reports page. And once again, we get this helpful reminder that the recipients will see all the details of the report regardless of their permissions. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click save. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about libraries in a bit, but just to give you a little preview, you can see the reports that you've scheduled in your library. So there's this Legal Hold Libraries tab and a sub-tab titled Scheduled Report. So if I click on this tab here, note the 2 reports listed down here. These are the ones that we scheduled. So if I go ahead and click on, custodian change demo, this is the one that we just scheduled. And, we can also link projects to run for this report to run against here as well. Okay, and recall that we discussed that another way to analyze our information beyond just scheduling these various built-in reports is using the question responses tab to take a look at which custodians completed questionnaires and if some are still in progress. So I'll go ahead and navigate to the Legal Hold question responses tab. And if you'll notice the views here, currently we're on the all submitted responses view, and I'll change that to the all responses view. So we can take a look at all of the question responses. Okay, and note on this dashboard, we have a pivot for custodian by project, answer status by project, as well as the question text list associated with each custodian below. So if I go ahead and click on our project here, note the answers reflected from ListRaid's questionnaire earlier. So recall that we used the portal as Greg to answer those questions, and now those answers are displaying here in the question responses tab. All right, so now that we've discussed some different reporting options, let's talk about closing a hold. Now, when it's time to close a hold, you can simply just go to the project itself. So I'm actually going to navigate to a different project in this case that is complete. This Initech project here. Okay, and like I said, when it's time to close this, you can just go to the project itself and choose Close Project. Now, in order to close a project, you must have a release communication attached to the project. This will basically notify all assigned and active custodians that the hold is closed and no further action is required on their part. So this is similar to releasing an individual custodian. So first, in the console, I'm just going to show you how to release custodians. So under Manage Custodians, I'll click Release. Okay, so you'll notice that there's 2 different options to release. You can release it with a communication or release it silently. And with release silently, no hold notice is sent out. But we'll just send with a communication using the legal hold release notice that was attached to this project. Okay, and I'll select all custodians, move them all over, and then click Release. Now I'll go ahead and close this project. Now that we've seen the full workflow of Relativity Legal Hold, I'd like to walk through a few miscellaneous items, including the Legal Hold libraries. Legal Hold libraries include the following 4 libraries. So questionnaires, questions associated to those questionnaires, attachments, and scheduled reports. So we'll go through and talk a little bit about each one. First, the questionnaire library. Now, recall from one of our previous exercises that we modified an existing questionnaire. This questionnaire was stored in the questionnaire library. The questionnaire library houses all questionnaires previously created and selected to be saved to. So you can create new questionnaires from this library as well. And note that the questionnaires cannot be modified after they have been sent out via a communication. Now, the question library works in conjunction with the questionnaire library. This library houses all of the questions that have been created for questionnaires. You can filter on the type of answers such as yes, no, multi-choice, single choice, etc. Additionally, you can add widgets to this library to get a visual breakdown of any of the fields enabled for pivoting. Remember that attachments are files that appear as links in the custodian portal. So, for example, you may want to provide a supplemental document for a custodian to read before they acknowledge participation in a project. Attachments, unlike communications, aren't sent out to custodians. These attachments will save inside the attachment library for future reference. Remember from our previous demo that you can schedule certain reports to be run on a set recurring basis. And I had shown you briefly in my demo the scheduled reports library. Here in this library, you can access the reports like we saw the two that I had created. You can view and edit their settings and link different projects for the reports to run against. Okay, so at this point, we have created and sent our first hold. We have started to build out our holds and our libraries. So now we'll take a look at the various libraries that are available. All right, so let's take a look at our legal hold libraries. So all 4 of our libraries are going to be housed here in the legal hold libraries tab. So you'll see all 4 of the ones that we just discussed. Now, scheduled reports, we took a brief look at this library earlier when we took a look at the 2 different reports that we had scheduled during our reporting demo. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the other 3, starting with questionnaires. So I'll go ahead and click on the questionnaires library here. Now, here in this list of questionnaires, you may see more than one of the same questionnaire. Here we have numerous instances of the same one. This is expected if you attach the same general questionnaire to multiple communications across multiple projects. Now, in the is locked column, you'll see that some of the questionnaires are locked. Now, the questionnaires that have a yes in the locked column cannot be modified because they have already been sent out via communication. So if I click on this first locked questionnaire, I can't edit anything. I can't move the questions. I can't edit the name. I can't really do anything on this questionnaire. And if you'll notice, there's even a message up at the upper right that states this questionnaire has been sent out and cannot be edited. Okay. And of course, any questionnaires that have a no in the is locked column are not locked. They can still be modified, and we can still make any edits as needed. Okay, we can drag questions around and make any other edits we need. Now, moving to the next library, we'll move along to questions. Okay. Now, notice that there are many different question types. So we see different question types. There can be multiple choice questions, single choice, questions about date, yes, no, or just open text. And there are, I just sorted that. Just set that back. And there are also multiple different categories here for questions. Note that you can also create a new question from right here in the library using this new question button here. Okay, I'm just navigating back to the questions library out of that question window. You can add widgets to any of these library objects to visually report on selected fields. And this can be really useful for seeing a breakdown for the types of questions here. So for example, I can go ahead and create a pie chart. So I'm going to add widget, and I'm going to create a pie chart showing the question category. So I'll group by category, pivot on grand total, and the display type will be a pie chart. And I'll add that pivot. Okay, so this is really nice. It just allows us to quickly see a breakdown of the types of questions. So even at a glance, we can see the bulk of the questions are about emails and file servers. So this is just a great way to visually display any information. All right, now the last library that we'll take a look at is the attachments library here. Now attachments, we see two attachments here that have already been uploaded. Attachments are uploaded to Relativity, but can only be accessed via links in the custodian portal. Remember that for security reasons, the physical file is not sent out to the custodians. And, to add any attachments that you want to send out, you can simply just click New Attachments and you can upload from any stored attachment, okay, using this here. All right, so as we approach the end of this training, a couple of things to note on the administrative side. Now, this class, as we discussed at the very beginning, is more of an introduction to Relativity legal hold. It's kind of like a 101 class, if you will. However, it is important to make sure that you're aware of the one-time setup or administrative tasks that are needed before creating the first legal hold project. So we're going to go through a couple of the administrative configuration pieces that need to be done before creating a project. First, the legal hold application included in the Relativity application library has to be installed to a workspace. So that's the first part of the setup. Once installed, you'll want to head to the Hold Admin tab, and from this tab, you can configure the mailbox settings in the Custodian Settings tab. You will need to access your SMTP server for this, and these settings determine the custodian portal. More details on these settings can be found in documentation. You can also schedule global reminders, configure preservation hold settings, and customize roles under the Hold Admin tab. Lastly, you may want to customize security of the legal hold application. These are some of the first time setups before creating your first projects. Now, it's important to point out that legal hold is completely securable like any other Relativity object. The legal hold application security is set at the workspace level. When you install legal hold into a workspace, Relativity creates a legal hold security admins group. This group will have all legal hold permissions enabled by default. You should be sure to add your hold administrator to this group. Now, as with most Relativity objects, you can individually secure legal hold projects, and system admins can access the legal hold application workspace permissions to manage custom permissions at the workspace level. So, as you see this screenshot on the right, this is a screenshot of the workspace permissions on the legal hold object. So, as you can see, the checkboxes are in different levels of permissions. So this level of control can prevent specified custodians from specific actions, such as sending communications or assigning custodians to projects, okay? In order for system admins to have access to the functions controlled by the legal hold application permissions, you must add those system admins to another security group or add a new group with access to the legal hold application permissions. And of course, there is a lot more to learn about each permission on the Relativity documentation site, but this is just a quick overview of how you can customize these permissions. Okay, and I will do a demo now to show you some of these different settings, especially for the administrators out there. So we'll take a look at the hold admin settings and the legal hold permissions in Relativity. Navigating over to the legal hold admin tab, note that the legal hold setting tab is nested under this tab here. So I'll go ahead and navigate to this. And this tab, as we mentioned previously, contains general settings, custodian portal settings, as well as outgoing email and incoming email. Now, All of these settings are well documented in terms of their descriptions and how to configure them. And note that there is also contextual help that outlines them as well. Now, within Legal Hold Admin, I'm going to go ahead and navigate over to the Global Reminder tab. Now, this functionality is used to automatically send periodic reminders to all active on-hold entities to review their hold obligations. So this can be enabled by editing here. You can set this global reminder to yes, set it on a specific scheduler, on a specific type of frequency, and configure your subject and body as needed. Remember that preservation hold settings here, this is where you will set up the Microsoft Office 365 domain and account needed to create preservation hold. So this is a one-time setup, and these are the settings for this particular environment. Within Legal Hold Admin, you can also create new roles right from within this tab as well. All right, as far as security goes, Legal Hold security is set at the workspace and item level. So to get to the workspace permissions, I'll go ahead and navigate to Administration Workspace Details, and then Manage Workspace Permissions. And expanding this window out, I'll go ahead and take a look at the hold owner's permissions. Now, keep in mind it's important to set the proper permissions in order to run and complete the project. So I'll filter for legal hold. Okay. And you'll note the different legal hold application permissions here. Note some things that we have done in this course are checked. So, for example, we have act on behalf of custodian, preservation hold, some different things are set here. Now, remember earlier when Mycroft, a custodian not assigned to our hold, received a redirect communication? You as an organization will need to determine how much access you want to grant to Mycroft as the assistant. If he were to act on behalf of the CEO, in our case, Molly Hooper, he may require more permissions in Relativity than he normally would as an assistant who may not have access to Relativity at all in order to receive and acknowledge redirected communications. All right, congratulations. You've made it through to the end of the legal hold training. So although we have finished the general workflow for using Relativity Legal Hold, there are a few more items that we can discuss. So I'm just going to spend the last little segment of the training covering alternate use cases. And like I said at the beginning, just provide some additional resources to help your understanding of legal hold and really empower you to, get the information and the resources that you need for your own cases. So now that the hold has been closed, where do we go from here? If the hold process evolves into a requirement to collect and review data, the next steps would be to proceed to the next phase of discovery. So from our hold, we've identified and notified custodians that they need to preserve their data. We've done this with our legal hold workflow. Next, the data. This data needs to be collected. And once key custodian's data has been collected, it needs to be processed or normalized, making it available for review and analysis. And it's important to keep in mind that a legal hold doesn't always amount to any further action once it's closed. Now, to summarize the functionality, Relativity Legal Hold provides customizable workflow. So it's a defined yet customizable workflow that stores all hold information in one place and makes it easy to pick up a project where someone else left off. Okay. A central list of communications and reports that provide you with real-time insight. Templates that allow you to get to work quickly. The ability to set up automatic reminders and escalations to custodians who have not responded to holds. And as we saw in our reporting section, a way to analyze project status and responses via reports and dashboards. Now let's talk about some alternate use cases. You can actually use questionnaires to send out surveys for a variety of purposes. So, you don't necessarily need to rely on an external site like SurveyMonkey to generate surveys. You can actually just use LegalHold to collect your responses to different questionnaires for different surveys. You can also use LegalHold as a human resources tool. You can issue employee compliance notices and send follow-ups and set reminders. For example, you can automate a communication that goes out to all employees monthly, quarterly, or yearly, something like even as simple as, have you completed the compliance training? Okay, so you can use it in that aspect as well. You can also use LegalHold to generate quick communications to facilitate and track email acknowledgement, such as invites to company events. Sometimes at Relativity, we'll use LegalHold for things like that, for acknowledgments like that or polls like that. And lastly, you can enable, expedite, and organize sales RFI and RFP processes. So there are several different use cases. Of course, as we talked about at the beginning of the class, a legal hold is typically in anticipation of a litigation or an investigation, but really the tool is multi-use. I mean, you can use it for all of these different types of use cases as well. All right. So as I always like to say, learning doesn't stop after a training. There are several different resources available to you for learning about LegalHold and just learning about relativity. These are listed here. So we have the Relativity blog, the help documentation site that I referenced a couple of times. That's just help.relativity.com. The training center where you can find additional videos, tutorials, webinars, and more. On that training center, there's a screenshot over on the lower right there. You can browse for, self-paced LegalHold trainings. There's a couple of, I believe, webinars that are a little bit more advanced that go into more advanced workflows. So if you're looking for a little bit more, browse through the LegalHold offerings there. You can look at the different certifications that we offer. The community site is a great place to find, different conversations about different products, different topics. It's also a great place to submit feature requests. So if there's something that you would love to see in the product, we're always trying to improve and meet the needs of our clients, and we take those very seriously. So the more votes on a feature something gets, the more likely it is to be pushed to the top of the list. So check out the community site. There's also user groups. These are education focused meetings in areas with engaged relativity user communities. And for any, technical support, you can email support@relativity.com. And like I just said, we're really committed to making your user experience as seamless as possible. So, our UX research team is looking for people working in e-discovery that are interested in participating in research studies. There's absolutely no pressure to participate, but if you are interested, here is a link to their UX research recruiting form. And there's no incentive for completing the form. It's just a form to express interest in participating in future studies. In it, you provide a bit of information about yourself so that they can reach out to you when you may be appropriate for a study sometime in the future. Each time the UX team contacts you, you can choose whether or not to participate in that study. So again, there's no pressure. Some studies may be incentivized and others may not. All right, so that brings us to the end of LegalHold training. Thank you so much again for taking the time to expand your LegalHold knowledge. And I hope that you gained more insights in this video. I hope that you are more comfortable with LegalHold. And if you're looking for hands-on opportunities, be sure to contact your account manager, solutions contact, or customer success manager. They will be able to set you up with some potential opportunities to get hands-on with the tool to further your practice. And if you have any content questions or any feedback on this training video, please email training@relativity.com. We are always trying to improve our training offerings and make sure that you get the most out of them. Otherwise, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.